is Sophie, and I'm 24 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio where nothing much ever happens. I work as a projectionist in an old movie theater, one of those places that used to be popular but now barely gets any customers. It's quiet most nights, and I don't mind that. I like the calm, and the job is simple. But one night something happened that I can't explain, and I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and we had a late show. There were about 10 people scattered throughout the theater, watching an old horror film. My coworker Jake was working in the lobby, cleaning up popcorn and closing up the snack bar. I was in the projection room, making sure the film was running smoothly. Everything was normal until I heard it, someone whispering my name. Sophie. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired, or maybe the sound was coming from the movie itself. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. Sophie. I turned around and looked out the small window into the theater. Everyone was glued to the screen. No one was looking up at the projection room. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just some weird echo from the film. I tried to focus on my work, but the whisper came again, this time from right behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. There was no one there. I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed my phone and texted Jake, telling him I thought someone was messing with me. He didn't reply. A few minutes later, I heard a noise outside the projection room door. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door, waiting for someone to knock or open it. But the door stayed shut, and the footsteps stopped. I opened the door quickly, half expecting Jake to be standing there, ready to jump out and scare me. But the hallway was empty. I felt like I was losing my mind. The whispering, the footsteps. It had to be a prank. Maybe Jake was messing with me. But where was he? I called out his name, my voice shaking a little. No answer. I walked down the hallway to the lobby, but he wasn't there either. The snack bar was closed, and the lights were dim. My heart was racing now. I went back to the projection room, trying to shake off the fear. I told myself I was just imagining things. But then I saw it. A shadow. Moving on the wall. It wasn't the shadow of a person sitting in the theater. It was something else. Something that didn't make sense. The shape was wrong, like it didn't belong to anyone. I blinked, trying to focus, but the shadow seemed to slip away, disappearing into the darkness. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it. It was a text from Jake. "Meet me in the basement," it read. The basement? We never went down there. It was just used for storage, and it was always locked. I didn't want to go, but I had to find out what was going on. Maybe Jake had found out who was pulling the prank. I grabbed the keys and headed down the stairs to the basement door. The air grew colder the further I went, and the smell of dampness filled my nose. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the old wooden stairs creaking under my feet. "Jake," I called out, my voice echoing in the small space. I saw a faint light at the far end of the room and walked toward it. That's when I saw him. Jake was lying on the floor, his throat slit, blood pooling around his body. I screamed, backing away, but my legs felt weak, and I stumbled. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor, and then I heard it again. The whisper. "Sophie." I froze. The sound was right next to me, like someone was standing behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. The room was empty, except for me and Jake's lifeless body. My blood ran cold as I realized the whispers weren't coming from someone. They were coming from the theater itself, from the walls, from the shadows. I don't remember how I made it out of that basement, but I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the building, gasping for air. I never went back to that theater. Closed it down after the police came, but they never found who killed Jake. All they found was me, sitting in the parking lot shaking and crying. But sometimes late at night I still hear it, that whisper. "Sophie." My name is Jake Turner. I'm 29 years old and I live in a small town in Ohio. Nothing much happens around here, especially after midnight. I work the night shift as a cleaner at the old Regal Theater downtown. It's not a fancy place, just an old building that's been around since the 70s. The carpeting smells like popcorn that's seeped into the walls, and most of the seats have permanent indentations from years of use. Still, it's my job, and it helps me pay the bills. I always work alone. My shift starts after the last screening, around midnight, and I usually finish by 2 or 3 in the morning. There's something peaceful about being the only person there, wiping down the seats and sweeping the floors. The silence is a nice change from the chaos of the day. But one night, that silence became unnerving. It started like any other night. The last movie finished, and the audience left. I waited for the few stragglers to wander out, then locked the front doors behind them. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and headed into Theater 3, where they had just finished showing an old horror film, the kind of film where the audience always leaves a mess. I sighed, plugged in the vacuum, and got to work. I was about halfway through sweeping when I noticed something strange. There was a man sitting in the back row, all the way in the corner. At first I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep during the movie, so I called out to him. "Hey man, we're closed. You gotta leave." He didn't respond. He just sat there, staring straight ahead at the blank screen. His face was in shadow, so I couldn't see him clearly. I walked a little closer, feeling annoyed. "Come on, man. It's late. You need to leave." Still nothing. No movement. No words. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about this didn't feel right. I pulled out my phone and called security, but just as I was about to hit dial, the man was gone. I blinked. The seat was empty. I stood there for a minute, confused. There was no way he could have left without me seeing him. There's only one exit, and I was standing right near it. I felt a weird twinge of fear, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just tired. I went back to cleaning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I turned my back, I felt like someone was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the theater was empty. After a while, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I finished up in Theater 3 and headed to the lobby. I was just about to start cleaning the concession area when I noticed something on the floor near the entrance. It was a newspaper. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe someone had dropped it earlier, but as I picked it up, I realized something was off. The newspaper was old. The paper was yellow, and the date on the front page was from 15 years ago. I frowned and unfolded it. The headline caught my eye. "Man found dead after midnight screening." I felt my heart skip a beat. The article described a man who had shot himself during a late-night movie at this very theater. The details were eerie. The man had been sitting in the back row, all the way in the corner, just like the guy I'd seen earlier. The date of the incident was exactly 15 years ago to the day. I dropped the newspaper and backed away, my mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. The man I'd seen, had I really seen him? Or was it something else? My head was spinning. I felt lightheaded, like the walls were closing in on me. Suddenly the lights flickered. I froze. The theater was silent, but in that silence I swore I heard something. A soft, faint sound, like a chair creaking. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly I turned my head towards Theater 3. The door was ajar, and from where I was standing, I could see the back row, and there, sitting exactly where he had been before, was the man. My heart pounded in my chest. I blinked, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, but he was there, staring straight ahead, just like before. I couldn't breathe and numb. I stumbled backward, dropping my mop, and ran for the exit. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street. When I finally looked back, the theater was dark and quiet, just like always. I quit the next day. I never went back. I couldn't, because every time I think about that night, I wonder if he's still there, sitting in the back row, midnight screening. My name's Liam Carter. I'm 27 years old, living in a small city in Oregon. Not much happens around here, which is probably why I enjoy going to the movies late at night. I like the quiet. The theater is almost always empty, and it's a good way to clear my head after a long day. One Friday night, I decided to catch a late screening of a new horror film. I'm not usually into scary movies, but I'd heard good things about this one, and the thought of an empty theater sounded nice. I got there around 11 p.m., bought my ticket, and grabbed some popcorn. The lobby was dead. I walked into Theater 5, and as expected, it was nearly empty, just the way I liked it. I found a seat right in the middle, perfect view of the screen, far enough away from the entrance so I wouldn't be distracted by any noise. There were maybe 3 other people scattered across the rows, but they were too far away for me to care. The lights dimmed and the movie started. At first, everything was normal. I was enjoying the movie, completely focused on the screen. The tension was building, and I could feel myself getting more absorbed in the story. But about halfway through, I started to feel strange. You know that feeling you get when someone's watching you? It crept up on me slowly. I tried to brush it off as part of the movie's atmosphere, but something felt off. I shifted in my seat and glanced back. Just a quick look. A man was sitting a few rows behind me, maybe 3 or 4. He was staring right at me. At first, I thought maybe he was just looking around, or maybe he zoned out. But no, he wasn't watching the screen. He was staring directly at me. His face was half hidden in shadow, but I could see his eyes wide open, unblinking. My stomach dropped. I quickly turned back around, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was imagining things. It's a horror movie, after all, right? People get spooked. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. I tried to focus on the movie again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. A few minutes passed, and I couldn't help myself. I had to check again. I slowly glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. Same position, same intense stare, but now he had moved 1 row closer. My heart started racing. I was genuinely freaked out now. Oh, I didn't want to look back anymore, but I couldn't help it. Every few minutes, I peeked behind me, and each time he was closer. 1 row, then another, until finally he was just 1 row behind me. I could hear him breathing now. Slow, deliberate breaths. My skin crawled. I wanted to get up and leave, but my body felt frozen. I kept telling myself, it's just a guy. He's probably messing with you. But the way he was sitting there, so still, just staring, it didn't feel like a joke. The movie ended and the lights came on. I stood up quickly, pretending like I wasn't freaked out. I didn't want to make it obvious that I was scared, but I couldn't help glancing back. He was still sitting there, not moving, just staring at me as I walked toward the exit. I sped up, practically jogging down the hallway and out into the lobby. I was almost at the door when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy footsteps, getting closer. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, faster and faster, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt something drop at my feet. I stopped, confused, and looked down. There, on the ground, was a knife, just lying there, with a folded piece of paper next to it. My hands were shaking as I picked up the note. It was simple, just 2 words, scribbled in messy handwriting, "Next time." I looked around, my eyes darting through the shadows of the parking lot, but he was gone. The guy was nowhere to be seen. I dropped the note and ran to my car, locking the doors as soon as I got inside. I never saw him again, but every time I go to the movies now, I can't help but check the seat behind me, just in case.